ironed the wall between us. The first time, Officer Maya Reyes pressed her hand against the cold iron door of cell block D. She told herself it was just another shift. She had learned to do that, to flatten her emotions into something manageable, something that wouldn't bleed through the cracks of her uniform. 3 years working inside. Westfield Women's Correctional Facility had taught her how to look without seeing, how to speak without feeling, how to walk through a world built entirely of consequence, and never once ask herself whether consequence was the same thing as justice. But that morning something was different. The hallway smelled like rain even though there were no windows. The fluorescent lights buzzed with unusual urgency, and in the far corner of the intake room, sitting with her hands folded in her lap like she was attending a church service rather than being processed into prison, was a woman named Delilah Wren. Delilah was 31 years old, convicted of financial fraud she had committed to pay for her mother's cancer treatment. She had not hidden what she did. She had stood in court and explained it with the quiet dignity of someone who had already made peace with the cost of loving someone too much. The judge had called it theft regardless of the motivation. The jury had agreed. And so Delilah arrived at Westfield with a 3-year sentence, a single photograph of her mother tucked inside her shoe, and eyes the color of deep water, the kind that appeared calm on the surface and pulled everything down beneath. Maya was not supposed to notice any of that. Her job was perimeter checks, conflict de-escalation, contraband prevention, and maintaining order in a facility that housed 240 women at various stages of grief. She was not supposed to notice how Delilah always took the last seat at breakfast so no one had to sit alone. She was not supposed to notice how Delilah spent her rec hour teaching an older inmate named Ruthie how to write letters to her grandchildren. She was not supposed to notice that Delilah never asked for anything. But Maya noticed. She noticed all of it, and the noticing began to ache. The first real conversation happened by accident in the facility library. 6 weeks into Delilah's sentence, Maya had been doing rounds and found Delilah sitting cross-legged on the floor between 2 shelves, holding a book of poetry to her chest with her eyes closed. Not reading, just holding it, like it was something alive. Maya should have moved on. Instead, she stood there until Delilah opened her eyes, and neither of them said anything for a long moment. And then Delilah said very quietly that the poem was about a lighthouse keeper who spent his whole life guiding other ships safely to shore and died never knowing whether any of them made it. Maya sat down on the floor across from her without fully deciding to do so. She told Delilah that she had driven past a lighthouse once on a road trip and thought it was the loneliest building she had ever seen. Delilah looked at her then, really looked, and said that she had always thought the opposite, that a lighthouse was the most devoted thing in the world because it kept shining, even when no one was watching. Maya went home that night and could not sleep. What grew between them was not reckless. It was not the explosion of something forbidden and wild that people imagine when they think about love in impossible places. It was slower and more devastating than that. It was the accumulation of small moments. A cup of water passed through a door, a book left on a windowsill with a folded corner at a page Maya thought Delilah would love. A look held 1 second longer than it needed to be. It was the way Maya began to time her rounds so she would pass the library in the late afternoon when the light came through the frosted glass in long gold bars, and Delilah would be sitting in one of them, reading or writing letters to her mother, who was still alive, still fighting. It was the way Delilah always seemed, to know when Maya had had a hard day and would say nothing about it but simply be present, in a way that eased something in Maya's chest without either of them acknowledging what was happening. But the world they existed in was built to prevent exactly this kind of humanity. The facility had rules that existed for good reasons, and rules that existed simply because institutions need walls, not just physical ones. A correctional officer developing any personal relationship with an inmate was grounds for immediate termination and potential criminal charges. Maya knew this. She had known it from the first week of training. She had watched it happen to a colleague 2 years before her, a man who had simply given an inmate his personal phone number to help her reach a lawyer, and she had watched the machine of a consequence grind him into dust without ceremony. And yet she could not stop herself from caring about Delilah in a way that went beyond professional duty, beyond simple human decency, into something that had no safe name inside those walls. The crisis came 4 months in. Another inmate, a volatile woman named Karis, who had developed a territorial obsession with the library, cornered Delilah one evening during a shift change, when the coverage gap was exactly wide enough for violence to breathe. By the time Maya heard the commotion and ran, Delilah was on the ground, her arm twisted behind her, and Karis was screaming something incoherent about respect. Maya acted entirely by protocol in that moment. She radioed for backup. She restrained Karis with the measured force of training. She secured the area, but when she knelt beside Delilah afterward and saw the way Delilah was trembling, not from pain but from the specific exhaustion of someone who had been holding themselves together for so long that one crack threatened to bring down the whole structure, something in Maya came undone entirely. She pressed her hand over Delilah's hand for 3 seconds. Just 3 seconds. It was nothing. It was everything. Delilah looked up at her and whispered that she was so tired. Not of prison, not even of the particular cruelty of that moment, but of being strong in a place that rewarded strength with more suffering and punished softness with vulnerability. She said she had not let herself cry once since arriving at Westfield because she was afraid that if she started she would not be able to stop, and she could not afford to fall apart in a place where falling apart was a kind of surrender, Maya told her, and she would never entirely be able to explain why she said it, whether it was weakness or courage or simply the truth, overwhelming every wall she had built, that she was not alone in this, that someone saw her, that someone saw every single quiet, extraordinary thing she did in this terrible place and found it more beautiful than anything she had encountered in the free world outside. That was the moment they both understood what was happening between them. And that understanding was not simple or clean. It arrived wrapped in grief, because they both knew the shape of the world they lived in. Maya spent 3 days afterward reviewing everything she knew about ethics, about her responsibility, about the fundamental power imbalance that made any kind of relationship between them something that could never be fair regardless of what either of them felt. She thought about Delilah's vulnerability, incarcerated, dependent on the very institution Maya represented, with 2 more years remaining in her sentence. She thought about what it meant to truly care for someone versus what it meant to allow your own feelings to become another weight placed on a person already caring too much. The decision Maya made was not what love stories usually celebrate, but it was the most loving thing she had ever done. She requested a reassignment. She filed the paperwork quietly, citing personal reasons, and she was transferred to a different block within the week. Before she left, she managed one last legitimate exchange in the hallway outside the library. She told Delilah she had requested a transfer and that a different officer would be covering her block going forward. Delilah looked at her for a long time. Then she nodded slowly, and in that nod was every word they had never said aloud. The understanding, the gratitude, the grief of it, and underneath all of it a strange and solid kind of peace, because Delilah understood what the transfer meant. It meant Maya had chosen to protect her even above her own feelings. It meant the care was real. If you believe in kindness, in the kind of love that chooses dignity over desire and sacrifice over selfishness, take a moment right now to show this story some love. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that real love sometimes looks like letting go. And subscribe, so you never miss a story that tries to tell the truth about the human heart. Delilah served her remaining 2 years. She was released on a Wednesday morning in early spring, and the world outside smelled like cut grass and something warm she couldn't name. Her mother was in remission. The photograph she had kept inside her shoe for 3 years was soft as cloth from handling. She stood outside the facility gates and breathed the first free breath she had taken in 3 years, and she thought about lighthouses, about things that shine not because anyone is watching, but because shining is what they were made to do. Maya had left the correctional system 8 months after her transfer, completing her time with integrity but knowing she was meant for something different. She was working for a nonprofit now, advocating for criminal justice reform, specifically for the rights of women, incarcerated for economically motivated offenses, women like Delilah, women whose crimes were love wearing the wrong clothing. She told their stories without names, with permission, with the reverence they deserved. They found each other again the following autumn at a community legal aid event where Delilah had come to speak about her experience and Maya had come to listen. They sat across a folding table in a school gymnasium with terrible lighting and paper cups of coffee, and everything they had never been able to say filled the air between them like weather. They were two people meeting for the first time as equals, fully free, fully seen with no wall between them and no role to play. What happened next was not sudden or dramatic. They talked for 3 hours. They exchanged numbers. They walked to their separate cars in the parking lot as the sun was going down and the sky turned the specific shade of gold that appears in late October and nowhere else. And Delilah said that she had once told an officer she admired that a lighthouse was the most devoted thing in the world. Maya said she remembered. They stood there in that gold light smiling at each other, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. Drop a comment below and tell us, has anyone ever shown you love by choosing what was right over what they wanted? What did that feel like? We read every single comment, and your words remind us why these stories matter. Some loves are not about possession. Some loves are about witness, about seeing another person so completely, so honestly that the seeing itself becomes a kind of shelter. Maya and Delilah never needed a fairy tale. They needed the truth, and they needed someone brave enough to hold it carefully until the world made space for it, and in the end, slowly and imperfectly and with great tenderness, it did.